Oh, there's my purse. Hey, Mystic Magic Podcast fans. We have another great episode today because today my guest is Reverend DJacquelyn Edwards. Reverend DJacquelyn is an ordained Centers for Spiritual Living minister, and she has been on this New Thought journey for a couple of decades. And so she's also served in different capacities for the Centers for Spiritual Living. She has been the senior minister, spiritual director of the First Church of Religious Science, Vallejo, from 2014 to 2019. She is a founding member and the past chair of the Centers for Spiritual Living Diversity and Inclusion Commission. She's a member of the CSL Nominating Council, an instructor at Holmes Institute, which is an institute for getting ministers trained. And she's currently a member of the Spiritually Motivated, Socially Engaged Ministry. And she has a bachelor's degree in human relations, a master's degree in organization development and change, and a master's degree in consciousness studies. So she believes that applied spirituality is a powerful path to prosperity, justice, and peace. Welcome, Reverend DJacquelyn, to Mystic Magic.
Thank you. Reverend Celeste.
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of get into who you are, and so that our audience knows a little bit more about you. And what I know about you is that you are interested in what's going on. The ministry that you're working with at Centers for Spiritual Living, spiritually engaged, spiritually motivated, socially engaged, is a very intriguing ministry that I think folks would like to hear about. Tell us about that work and what y'all do there.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me on. And SMSEs is the vocal in writing, but vocal arm of the spiritual leader. So it came about as a way for the spiritual leader, who is currently Reverend Edward Villion, to speak into the world about various issues, about current. So there's a balance. We seek a balance between current events and then values. I'm going to use that term, and meaning an opportunity to explore what we believe.
Okay. Now, I know that there's a lot of talk around Centers for Spiritual Living about a world that works for everyone. And I'm trusting that committee is looking for ways to do just that.
Let the church say amen. We are not only looking for ways to do that, but seeking and encouraging our communities to remember that is our commitment, that we have that on all of our public documents. We say our vision is to create a world that works for everyone. And so when you have that vision out there, then you have to come back and look at what's behind it and how do we bring that vision to fruition. So it is the piece of both looking at where we are, where we want to be, and how we fill that gap in between, what the journey is. And that's where it gets interesting, sometimes a little surprisingly so, but surprisingly so in the way that I think it's Ernest Holmes that says, there's nothing to be healed, but only the truth to be revealed.
Yeah.
So as we reveal the truth, for example, systemic racism, let's take that one as a truth, an evidence that even people that want it to stay in place are not denying that it exists. So when we take that truth, then we have to look at what is the spiritual truth behind it. And the spiritual truth that we're looking at, that we're looking to have evolved, is that there is the oneness, and then within the oneness, there is the multiplicity. That without the multiplicity in the oneness, it's a little dull and boring to say the least. And at the other extremes, it's extremely inequitable. There's a lot of inequity, there's a lot of injustice. And so, as people of the faith, as
Hmm.
we like to think of ourselves, it becomes our responsibility as well as our opportunity, not just to look and to see, but what we like to say is that treat and move your feet, but to put some
Yes,
action behind it and
right.
to participate with other people in putting
Well,
action behind
yeah,
it.
that's what I'm hoping that y'all are doing. And speaking of putting things in action, you are a team member on Honoring Freedom, a Juneteenth symposium that's coming up on June 18th and 19th. That's just a few days away. And so
Yes.
I just wanted to check in with you about, what made you want to become part of this team, and what would you like to share about the event?
So it's not, the two things are actually not disconnected. There's a definite connection. What I want to share about the event, at the risk of a little embarrassment to my own self, when I came to California, I'd never heard of Juneteenth. And then I heard it was, well, apparently the enslaved people in Texas did not know about the Emancipation Proclamation, did not know that the institution of slavery was now illegal. They got the word late. I kind of had a, what? Really? Sucking of the teeth, maybe even.
Hmm.
Um, since that time, and this is why I think honoring freedom is so important, because, they say if one person has a question, a lot of people have a question. So I think that even though this is a lot of years later, that there are a lot of people that don't really understand the depths of Juneteenth and what that meant and what that was about and the various aspects of it, and the role that freedom is a spiritual principle. We keep
Yes,
coming back to that because that's the only place to come back to. And the role that freedom in consciousness plays as it unfolds and unfolded through that process, that was people in Texas finding out about the emancipation and then how they move themselves into freedom, both physically, but it had to be coming from a mental, a consciousness of freedom. And honoring
right.
freedom is where we're going to talk about all of those different aspects. If you look at the players, if you look at the participants and the places that they're showing up, every place from the contemporary folk, Andrea Earl always brings it, to our panel of elders. I'm humbled that we have a panel of elders and that we're taking advantage of that while they're still in this body, right? So that we
Right.
can garner that wisdom and apply that wisdom to how we look at how freedom was honored in the past and how we get to do it in the present and how we
Yes.
get to celebrate. Can I talk about August of 2022?
Well, we'll talk about that in just a moment. I just want to mention that Honoring Freedom happens again, and that's Friday, June 18th, and Saturday, Juneteenth itself. And yes, it is a fundraiser for celebrating our soul. Go ahead, DJacquelyn.
So, celebrating our soul is a coming together of Black folks, African American people in New Thought, and a continuing of the education, of the learning pieces, but also just our opportunity to be together. And
Mhm.
I know I changed my tone, my languaging in that being together, there is value in, I'll say it this way, in the visioning that we have been doing for celebrating our souls. Throughout that visioning, things keep coming up that are so both uniquely culturally Afrocentric in terms of how we see people dressed, the music that we're hearing, the food that we're tasting. I think it was you, Celeste, that came up with gumbo. I smell gumbo. Girlfriend has some gumbo up in the mix, but you weren't the only one. So there is this hungering and thirsting for right us, not just righteousness, but right us in that
Yes.
way that we can be together, share together, and grow together in this thing called New Thought, because part of our most important charge in this time frame, this era that we're living in, is to not only heighten the African presence, and I mean the African presence in New Thought, but to use that consciousness and that awareness, because I had an epiphany when you were praying us in earlier, but to heighten that and to bring all of who we are to this New Thought movement, as well as to the entire planet.
Yes.
Again, circling back to, for the purpose of creating a world that works for everyone, but also for really having us see ourselves and all the
Yes.
wonder and the deliciousness and the fabulousness of who we are.
Yes.
And I think there's a special way that that happens when we come together. So I'm excited about celebrating, because that's what we'll be doing, celebrating
Yes.
our
And
souls.
um, celebrating our soul will happen in Kansas City, August 11th through 14th in 2022. That will be a live event. I am one of the co-chairs of the program committee, so trust me, it will be exciting. Just speaking to one of our keynote speakers earlier today, I'll just tell you that the superstars will be there. But Reverend DJacquelyn mentioned visioning, and I want to share with you who may not know about visioning. It's a spiritual practice. It's meditative, but it's also very open and allows you to be able to receive a download from spirit. And the invitation is just to stay open and available to it and see what comes through. It's not ego driven, it's not agenda driven, it's spirit driven. And I use that personally for anything that I commit myself to so that I know that I'm on track with spirit. Now let's get back to you, DJacquelyn. You are a native New Yorker. You mentioned coming to
Yeah.
California a few minutes ago. And there's a couple of big changes that you made, and that was one of them. I know you've been in California for a minute, for several decades now. But
Mhm.
what brought you to Cali from New York?
I came here to go to school.
Okay.
I'm somewhat of a late bloomer on the one hand, budding revolutionary at the time on the other. So when I graduated from high school, I went to college for a year, got involved in civil rights movement. I'm just going to say the movement generically, then went back, got a job in, I'm really going to date myself right now, in the Model Cities program. And out of that had an epiphany that what was needed was more than good intention. What was needed was some business acumen, and what was needed was some strong program-based education. Some skills were needed to move this thing forward. So I went back to school. And I applied to and was accepted at some place that does not exist anymore, United States International University in San Diego. So I touched bases in San Diego as my first entree to California. But school, I came here to
Okay.
finish my education. Still took me a minute after that, but that's what got me here.
So you stayed in California, and somehow you moved from corporate world of public administration and all these different things that you were doing as you were seeking a support system for doing the work that really fuels you, and into ministry. That doesn't seem far-fetched. Tell me about what brought you into ministry.
So, I don't know, it's someplace between my mother, Reverend Ernie Forks, who was my first minister in religious science at what is now East Bay Church of Religious Science, and that was long time ago in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. Um, and I am a great believer that spirit has a phenomenal sense of humor, because I knew I wanted to. Once when I discovered this thing, my mother introduced me to religious science. And when I discovered this thing, I knew I wanted to learn as much about it as possible. And so I knew I wanted to be a practitioner. My high school yearbook said I wanted to be a social worker. So I'm going to take it to, there's a book called What Color is Your Parachute? And in that book, there's an exercise that you do, and you, depending on your answer, you take yourself to a particular corner in the room. And in that corner of the room are lawyers, ministers, teachers, social workers, imagine that, counselors. I'll just do, there's probably some more, but I think you can see the connection. All of those really call on the same kind of skills. And my work was in human resources. So again, it's the same kind of skills. It's training, it's
Service.
presentation, it's service. Yes, it's service.
Hmm.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
So it was kind of
So
a natural flow.
now your particular class of ministerial students made
Yes.
such an impact on the Centers for Spiritual Living that they ended up creating a diversity, and at that time was just inclusion, but now it's diversity, equity, and inclusion commission for the Centers
Mhm.
for Spiritual Living. Connect the dots for us and then tell us how that happened. And I know you were the founding chair of that commission. We'd like to hear that story.
So it's I like to use the metaphor of braids. So the three pieces of the braid would be the Santa Rosa campus somehow wound up with nine or more African American students there on campus at the same time. East Bay Church, a few of us and a few of the people who brought about what was initially just the Diversity Commission, were of East Bay origin. Um, and then the planning of the 2011 conference, our annual conference that we have in February, the program had zero, and I'm going to say it again, zero people of color. So I have to say, and I want to correct, I was not the founding chair. We had two co-chairs. One was Claire Middleton, who made her transition earlier this year,
Right,
and the other was Greg Toole, who was at the time one of the senior staff at Home Office, also
right.
very much out of East Bay, and very instrumental in both listening, hearing what we had to say, and pulling it together. The other name that I have to throw in the pot is Reverend Dr. Francione, because she was the one who came to our campus, Santa Rosa campus, when I called, yell for help. I called
Yes.
her and said, Reverend Francione, it's on fire up here. Help us put it out. And the particular fire, God bless him, was that Dr. Kim, who was the dean at that campus, decided that at our retreats, we have two retreats, that at our retreat, this had to be the fall retreat, that we would spend the free afternoon. Retreat starts, I'm going by memory now, Friday, and then Saturday afternoon, there's a free afternoon that we would have, and the term is not coming to me, so I'm going to say an open conversation about
Okay.
race.
Hmm.
And it was on. The conversation that he thought was going to go from noon till dinner time at 5 went until 2 o'clock in the morning. We did what I later learned were called affinity groups. The students of color broke off in one space and the white students in another. Some, particularly the students who were seniors, the white students who were seniors, were deeply upset, felt that their whole graduation experience was being negatively impacted. But the conversation continued. The conversation then expanded to the leadership of Centers for Spiritual Living. We weren't CSL at the time. That conference, incidentally, was called the Integration Conference. That was
Right.
the conference where we would become Centers for Spiritual Living from the two organizations. So then there were conversations with Ken Gordon, who was the head of the RSI side, Kathy Hearn, who was the head of the
UCRS,
CRS side,
United. Mm-hmm.
yes, the United side. And again, Spirit in Action, Andrea Earl was on the conference planning committee. So she was involved in those conversations. And I want to give CSL kudos and say this is why I'm still in CSL, because these conversations were happening in November and the conference was in February. And if you, and I know you know about conference planning because you've been, prodding us along, we're going to be there in a minute. Um, Literally there was a turn on a dime by between mid-November and the end of December. The conference was reformatted such that, and I also want to note that every one of the white platform speakers, the ministers who were platform speakers, volunteered to give up their spot when this was brought to their attention. Um, but what they wound up doing was instead partnering. And so if you have the opportunity to get the recordings from that 2011 conference, you got some powerful stuff because
Yeah, I
you
was there.
have ministers, then I'll let you speak on that. And the upshot of it over a year of visioning
Mm-hmm.
at Gregory Toole's insistence. Between
Mm-hmm.
Gregory and Claire Middleton, they insisted that we vision on what our next step should be. The Diversity Commission was created out of that visioning process. And we had our first meeting at the 2012 conference in New Orleans. Um, and I cannot remember the exact number. It had to be an even number because we were split between ministers who came from the RSI side and ministers who came from the UCORS side of the house. And that was our humble beginnings back in February, that would have been, and it was during Mardi Gras time. So
Yeah.
double celebration there. In February of 2012, we
Right.
started the Diversity Commission and it evolved to what it is now through education. Our first commitment, and again, you were involved in this too, was doing some kind of an educational event at every conference. We were
Yes.
committed to do a workshop at every conference. And the last piece I want to say about that, which is both a personal note, but it is also a movement note in terms of how we get to both see two things. One, that there is in process a speeding up of our growth and our evolution that I am just humbly grateful for.
Yes.
And secondly, that at the same time, we have to meet people where they are, which means we have to see where they are and
Mm-hmm.
go there and bring them. And the piece that brings that to mind is that I remember so clearly because my feelings were so hurt when we went to Miami. When it wasn't Miami, where's Disney World? Orlando. We had
Orlando.
a conference in Orlando, and I want to say that was maybe 2014, 15. I
Right,
don't remember the year.
right, because it was after Trayvon.
It was after Trayvon. And we presented the the videos from Shakti Butler's um,
Hmm.
entity. We presented the videos that talked about racism and talked about systemic racism, really, and made the connection between that and economics and just lots of things. If you know the work of Shakti Butler, then you know that she just does some fantabulous things and very
Right.
clear, very, very clear. Girl, people got up and walked out of my little workshop, broke my feelings completely and
Well,
totally.
they weren't ready,
They weren't
and
ready.
for a lot of people, they had to watch a Black man be killed for 9.5 minutes before it got real for them. So here we are.
So here we
Now,
are. Here we
um,
are. And let me just wrap that real quickly. And so I'm
mhm,
saying that I get that they weren't ready. And I want to come to the ministers' conference last year where Shakti Butler was one of our speakers and got
yes,
resounding, resounding welcome and
yes.
applause. So it does happen. And we have to meet people where they are. I
We have
was
to
not
keep doing the
meeting them
work.
where they were then,
Yeah, we have
but
to
I
keep
know
doing
that.
the work.
Yes.
And I want to get to your ministry, which is Platinum Butterfly. Now you said the name came from platinum as a precious metal, and you worked with metal or something at that time.
It's a
And then
strong metal.
I know it's the
Platinum.
highest valued metal. Tell us about the butterfly part.
So platinum is a strong metal, and butterflies, they're soft and they're they
Fluid.
well, that's the metamorphosis piece, but they go with they butterflies travel on the wind. It's the wind beneath their wings, and the way that they move through the world is with ease and grace.
Okay.
Ease and grace. So that's the butterfly piece. That's the platinum piece. It wasn't until probably within the last 3 years, because I've been using Platinum Butterfly Ministries for, I saw recently when I had to renew my business license for like almost 15 years.
What do you do?
It's really ministry, it's counseling, it's organizational development stuff. So, for example, I've worked with two communities on creating three, if I count East Bay, but that was before Platinum Butterfly Ministries, on creating their vision and mission statements. Because I have a strong human resources background, I can and do, and all of it for me is from a spiritual perspective, right? From a spiritual foundation, help you with your organizational development pieces having to do with personnel. What kind of personnel do you need to do specific jobs? Um, Really, and then the counseling piece is what we call practicing,
Hmm.
acting as a practitioner or a ministerial counsel. Um, let's see, what else? So my tagline is pollinating the spiritual core of individuals,
Mm,
groups, and organizations. Right.
wonderful.
So that kind of takes in what it's about, because I believe we all and everything has a spiritual core.
So tell us, is there a website or where can we find out what's going on with you at Platinum Butterfly Ministries?
So the short answer is no, and I'm not going to even make an
Okay.
excuse. I'm just
Okay.
going to be quiet
We
until
can
you'll
find you on
know.
Facebook though, right?
You can find me on Facebook. Yes.
Well, I am so glad that you came on Mystic Magic today. You are determined, you are fearless, and you are at times gentle. And it takes all of that to be a platinum butterfly. So I appreciate your willingness to go with the flow as well as your determination. And we need all of you for that. So
Thank you.
thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. This was fun. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Peace and
This is Mystic
blessings.
Magic, exploring our spirit to understand our lives.